We are anxious to build a strong working partnership with China as a leading economic power and a leading strategic power with a major role at the United Nations and in terms of world affairs.
That's U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in advance of the 6th Annual Strategic and Economic Dialogue. As China and the United States wrap up their latest meeting, what, if any, progress was made on the difficult issues that divide the two nations? We'll talk with a Chinese Foreign Ministry official and a leading China expert in the U.S. Congress. Hello, everyone. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington, D.C., sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. There were more than 60 topics on the agenda when senior officials from China and the United States got together in Beijing this week for the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. It's an annual gathering started in 2009 by former Chinese President Hu Jintao and U.S. President Barack Obama. Its purpose to discuss a wide range of bilateral, regional, and global strategic security and economic issues. Many are well known: economic and currency reform, cyber espionage, climate control, the Koreas, maritime disputes, and various other interactions in the Asia-Pacific region, just to name a few. Later, we'll have reaction to this latest round from a Chinese Foreign Ministry official and the head of a U.S.-China working group in Congress. But for more on what just concluded, we begin in Beijing with CCTV's Yin Hong. Hong, during the closing session, Chinese Vice Premier said the success of this round of talks reaffirms that the two countries have the ability and wisdom to manage their contradictions and differences. And Secretary Kerry, for his part, used a lot of words like common interest, cooperation, and constructive. So how did things go? It seems there was a lot of conciliatory messages.
Yes, certainly is all of those words you've mentioned is the most frequent terms that we've been hearing about in the past 2 days, which shows that the attitude of the leaders of the two countries, they are delivering an important message to the world that the two countries will stick to dialogue and cooperation to promote the new model of major country relationship. And under that relationship, there are lots of thorny issues, like you've mentioned earlier, waiting for the two countries to be solved.
Hong, one of the most concrete agreements seems to be environmental issues and climate change. Kerry even used the word breakthrough. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, you're talking about the 8 pacts signed by the two countries. The United States and China signed 8 partnership pacts, which is aimed at capturing and storing carbon and setting up more efficient power distribution networks. Well, they also agreed to raise fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks and to study gas use in industrial boilers. Well, the deal brings the world's 2 biggest carbon emitters closer together on climate policy, and I think that'll be a very major step forward for the two countries and for the world to solve a problem they're facing by a human being.
What about economic issues? Any agreements there on bilateral investment treaty?
We know that the two countries have been, China and the United States are the largest two countries which, despite deeply interconnected business ties and two-way trade worth more than $500 billion a year, well, divergence still exists between Beijing and Washington, and especially in the economic field. And on top of all the economic issue this time is the exchange rate of the Chinese currency. Well, Washington again pushed for China to move to a market-driven exchange rate. For example, Jack Lew, of U.S. Secretary of Treasury, he said that we support China's efforts to allow the market to make a more decisive role, but we also need China to move to a market-based exchange rate is an essential step. But meanwhile, in response, Chinese Finance Minister Lou Jiwei defended the country's currency interventions, saying it was difficult to take a hands-off approach when it came to yuan, given an unsteady economy and abnormal capital inflows. Back to you.
Peng, there were also some sensitive issues like maritime disputes and cyber hacking allegations. What can you tell us about those?
Actually, the two issues you've mentioned are believed to be the two sensitive issues this time, and that's what we heard more frequently is that Kerry reiterated once and again, saying that United States is not taking stance on the issue of maritime disputes, and Kerry insisted this time that United States takes no sides on whose claims are valid, and that's what China urged the U.S. to do. China says that it will continue to steadfastly protect its territorial and maritime rights. And Yang Jiechi, the State Counselor of China, reiterated on Thursday that China was committed to its maritime claims and solving disputes by means of talking to countries on a one-to-one basis. And on the other issue you've mentioned, that it's on the internet security issue. Well, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told reporters that discussions were frank, and both sides agreed it was important to keep talking. And Yang Jiechi again said China wanted cooperation on cyber issues on the basis of mutual respect and trust. But it seems that few details emerged on how fast those issues going to be solved.
All right, thank you so much, Yin Hong in Beijing. And joining us now in Washington is Rick Larson. He's a member of the U.S. Congress and the co-chair of a bipartisan congressional working group focusing on U.S.-China relations. And from Beijing, a counselor with China's foreign ministry, Zhou Jingxing. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Congressman Larson, let me begin with you. Let's listen to what China's President Xi Jinping said at the opening of this week's dialogue, and then I'd like to get your reaction.
Sure.
China and the U.S. have different social systems and levels of economic development. Our differences call for communication and cooperation. Both countries should take a long-term strategic view of the relations. We should respect each other's territorial sovereignty and path of development, strengthen dialogue, maintain strategic patience, and not be derailed by short-term issues.
Your thoughts, sir?
Well, I think President Xi's comments really do underscore how the U.S. sees this relationship. There's great potential for cooperation on economic issues, bilateral investment treaty, on environmental issues like climate change, and even on security issues like North Korea and Iran. But there are issues where there are differences that we need to work through. But I think the overall emphasis is on the continued potential for continued cooperation, and that's extremely important.
Congressman Zhou, let me turn to you. Counselor Zhou, rather, my apologies. As the congressman mentioned, there were areas where they seem to have narrowed their differences. There was a lot of talk of cooperation. What are some of the issues that you still see standing in the way between these two countries?
Well, I think indeed that the two sides have reached a lot of agreement. The first one is that they agreed on the development of the future direction of this overall bilateral relations. That is to build a new model of major power relations in the world. So under that, within that framework, I think that there are a lot of, there are quite a number of issues that the two countries should address. And I think most of them on the part of China, these are the issues that concern China's sovereignty and territorial integrity within the context of the United States rebalancing towards Asia. And I think especially the United States position and expression of their statement of their position and some of the actions and words on the East China Sea and South China Sea certainly have worried about China. So I think that for the time being, those are the major issues that, some of the major issues that are in the way for a better relationship.
Congressman, what are your thoughts on the whole issue of China's sovereignty and recent disputes in South China Sea?
Well, I think from a U.S. perspective, what we'd like to see is that any differences between countries in that region are dealt with through dialogue, through communication, because stability in that region is not just in the interest of the United States, it's in the interest of all the parties there. And there are broader issues as well that are important, like freedom of navigation, ensuring that countries can continue to use the open waters for navigation purposes, that these are kinds of issues that spread beyond just maybe disputes between two countries, but have impacts on a lot of other countries as well. So there's an expectation of stability, and I think the best way to do that is through dialogue and communication, and that's certainly what the U.S. is trying to impress upon any and all parties involved with these issues.
Let's listen to what Secretary Kerry told CCTV just before leaving for the strategic and economic dialogue. I think it addresses some of those issues.
Well, we definitely don't view China as an inevitable rival. We view China with hopes and possibilities of increasing partnership. It's a very important relationship, and we want China to understand that this doesn't have to be a rivalry. There are sometimes things in which we are in competition, but it's much more important for us to find the ways to cooperate.
Councillor Zhou, your reaction. Again, Secretary Kerry repeating there's a lot more they see in common, a spirit of cooperation, and that really the two countries aren't really rivals.
Exactly. I think the Secretary is right. But I think that there is a question on the part of China that we see as the problem that with the United States approach. And because the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea was not a problem, and it is still not a problem right now. And but tensions arose in the past few years because of some countries in the South China Sea were quite provocative, if I may use the word. And so China just reacted towards those issues. But China still, as a responsible member of the international community, and especially a major power in this region, has acted very, very responsibly not to escalate the tension there, to protect the freedom of navigation. So I think that there is an area for China and the United States to cooperate together. That is that as two major powers in the world, we should talk to each other and make clear our positions and especially match our words with actions so that freedom of navigation will be ensured and the South China Sea will return back to the calmness as in the past.
Congressman, do you agree?
Well, I think it's hard to disagree with my good friend, Councillor Zhou. He's always so reasonable and reasoned in his comments. And I do think that from a U.S. perspective, freedom of navigation is important for all countries in that region. As well, I think we see that one person's provocation can be seen as one person's reaction. And so at some point, that provocation-reaction cycle needs to slow down, cease, and dialogue, real dialogue needs to continue. And if the U.S. can play a role in that, we want to do that. Ultimately, we want to see stability in that region. And that relationship between the United States and China, despite this, will continue, and will continue to be based in cooperation. Secretary Kerry said there will be some competition, but there won't be conflict. There are way too many things that the United States and China agree on, need to work on, and both countries and leaders know that that has to happen.
All right, well, we need to take a break. More on relations between China and the United States when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.